Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm going to cover a wide range of topics, but we're going to start off with a scripture from the book of Ephesians, where the Apostle Paul said to pay attention, just pay careful attention, then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, redeeming the time because the day's evil. And that says, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will. It says, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to reckless indiscretion. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because, like I've said in multiple videos, that the American government is creating multiple narratives. There is an end goal, but there are multiple narratives between the fires that I talked about the other day on all the different oil refineries, between the meat shortages, the food shortages, the hacking, the gas hacking, why America is printing all of this money, and it's to drive prices higher, which is why you see them, which I talked about previously, about why the government is paying people more money to stay home, right? And as a result, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. They were like, once they had a taste of the good life, they were like, they can't go back. It's just like when poor people get a little taste of, that little bit of a high life, which is why you see, especially within impoverished people, you're like, why are all these poor people, got the fanciest shoes on? Why do these people look like they're rich? But the reality is that they're poor, and it's because mentally, when the poor get a taste of how the rich live, the reality is that they go out and spend as if they are rich, and that's how the rich make their money. Instead of the poor people realizing that what they should be doing is investing so that they can later on have some passive income that they can spend. Instead, they spend their active income. But we're not going to talk about that. Now, this might be new information for you, but there is a reason why you see articles. This is a brand new article that came out, I believe, yesterday. I believe this article came out yesterday talking about cicadas. Cicadas are those locusts, right? This came out on the 3rd, so it's actually from today. Came out today. And the article says, don't eat cicadas if you're allergic to seafood. FDA warns. This says the insects has emerged by billions this year across the eastern United States and have curious foodies salivating. I'm like, who in America is salivating over eating cicadas? It says, but their similarities to crustaceans make them allergy risk, health officials warn. Now, there is a reason for all of that. Now, I will say this one thing. Biblically speaking, right, when John the Baptist fasted in the wilderness before he met Jesus, this is how he was able, in essence, to sustain himself. The Bible says that he ended up eating locusts and honey. And that's basically how he was able to sustain himself. So it's not that you couldn't eat these things to sustain yourself, to have a source of protein. It's why in essence, are we seeing more articles about this? And this has been going for a little while, but it's a big push talking about this lately.
Trillions of cicadas are making their appearance after spending the last 17 years underground. And no one is more excited to see these winged insects make their debut than my next guest, who cannot wait to put them on his menu. Okay, this is sort of, I haven't actually eaten a bug since I was 3 when I had a spider.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm really psyched about the whole trillions of cicada coming out for Brood 10 because it's getting so much press and nature's getting press. So there's all sorts of important issues that this becomes a platform for. So eating insects is really the future, and it's been the past of humanity as well.
They're alive.
Yeah, so there you go.
Oh, I don't understand.
So the way you'll be doing it is just kind of put in. Oh, no, I was going to have you just use those.
No.
The really fresh ones.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So there you go. I'm totally joking. Yeah, I'm going to put this
Wait,
back.
no, really?
So
Do I really have to eat a live one?
No.
Okay,
I was kidding.
Actually thought
Fred
I
is spared. Fred survives another day.
Ooh, Berman the cicada's alive.
Yeah,
okay.
So here
All right, good.
Yeah, so here are boiled
He had me
cicadas.
going, Berman. He had me going ahead of the segment, And I was like, okay, well, I didn't know that that was part of the assignment.
Can I just tell you
I'm
one
here
thing?
to do my work. What?
You're about to eat dead cicadas, so don't get too excited just yet.
I got to be honest. I think this was really good for him to tell me I was eating live ones, because this is seeming like an upgrade.
And if you look out the top, this is what a cicada looks like when it's coming out of the ground.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
you got artwork over here as well.
Are you ready?
Cheers.
Actually, I'm less
Yeah.
scared of this. Okay.
Oh, the crunch.
Do I have a wing hanging out of my mouth? It's literally in there.
It's not a wing, it's a leg.
Hey, that's actually quite delicious.
What does it remind you of?
Now, just pushing that aside for a second, right? And talks about inflation, and I've talked about inflation and how what we're witnessing, while it will cause inflation, it's not as a result of, you know, America in essence going down the drain. This is manipulation of the dollar for the purpose of creating inflation. Now, BlackRock is basically a huge fund, and America utilizes these are in essence the people who really run the country. This BlackRock CEO Larry Fink warns investors are in for a pretty big shock. Inflation fears grow. This article came out today because most people haven't had a 40+ year career, and they've seen declining inflation over the last 30+ years. This Fink said that at a virtual event hosted by Deutsche Bank, it says, so this is going to be a pretty big shock. And so what we are going to see as a result of the manipulation are rising rates. Now, how high the rising rates will go, the Federal Reserve is saying that they want them to go north of 2%. We are currently at 1.625. So the goal is to get inflation over 2%. Whether they will do that or not is another story. But that, of course, will impact Americans. It will stifle job growth, and it will cause all debt to, in essence, you have to pay more on the debt because now there will be a higher interest. Currently, they're almost near zero. Now, BlackRock is typically the beneficiary of what has been going on with the money manipulation, right? This was back from 2020. It says Fed hires BlackRock to help calm markets, right? Its ETF business wins big. It says the central bank's market intervention helped the largest U.S. provider of corporate bonds exchange traded funds get larger. So a lot of that money that the Federal Reserve was printing under Powell, right, was managed by BlackRock, right? And so you have the Federal Reserve chairman. Fed Chair Powell has upwards of 11.6 million invested in BlackRock firm. And it says they will manage the 750 billion corporate bond program for the Fed. And so it's like that scripture that I read where Jesus said that the people of the unrighteous ones, they know how to benefit one another. And this is exactly what they do. In terms of Jesus was referring to money. But then he said that the sons of the light, they don't act with the same shrewdness that wicked people do. They act for their own preservation, right? This is what they do. Just like how Cuomo ends up with a $5 million book deal, right? He did what he had to do here in New York. He threw all those people into the nursing homes, and they're like, don't worry, we're gonna hook you up on the back end, right? Even though all this information about, he was touching women and all these women came out of the woodwork that typically would cut anybody's career off, especially for a politician, as you can see, unfazed. The information came out about how he was lying about all the numbers of the nursing home, how he deliberately put all these people in, right? Unfazed. He's just like, doesn't hurt him in any way, shape, or form, no matter what he does. Similarly with Dr. Fauci, people imagine that Dr. Fauci is like, fire Fauci. And it's like, if President Trump, who supposedly was for the people, didn't do it, what makes you think these people who are against you openly are going to do it? Fauci, of course, won the Nobel Prize. He won $1 billion. That was given to him by who? It was given to him by the Jewish government, right? Jerusalem government gave Dr. Fauci $1 million for telling the truth, right? And so people imagine, just don't realize that it is a multifaceted manipulation that is going on. Now, if you actually do a little bit of a Google search, like if you just look up, for example, Americans to eat bugs, there are a lot of interesting articles going a little far back, but there's some very relevant articles talking about this and how it was like an article here talking about 3/4 of Americans, right, from 1818. Survey shows that 3/4 of Americans are open to eating bugs. I'm just like, I don't know what Americans you're referring to. But the reason being is because we're going to see stuff like this, right? Plant-based meat, actually good for you. Now, if you actually do any sort of research, this stuff is terrible for you. The nutritional value for the plant-based, which is not even plant-based, it's just synthetic. Like if you actually read this article, all of these links will be down below for those who are interested in digging a little deeper into really what the manipulation and the plan is for many here in America. Now, this stuff is terrible for you. It's very high in salt. It's high in saturated fat. It's not good for you in any way, shape, or form. But they disguise it under the guise of, oh, it's a vegetarian, it's plant-based, so it should be healthy for you. It's not plant-based, furthest from the truth. If you're this is why basically moving forward, these are going to be the choices. Unless you're part of the elite class and you're the well-to-do individuals, meat is going to become very expensive. Why? This article came out. This was from Changing America from the Hill. The United Nations warns of famines of biblical proportions within the next years. As famines could break out in dozens of countries in the developing world. Now, the developing world is responsible for where we get most of our food. For example, places like Colombia and in China and in other nations is where we get most of our food. America really doesn't produce that much food, and a lot of the food that America produces, they ship out. Right? They ship out a lot of that, especially with things like soybeans and corn, gets shipped out to China. Right? And even the American government, versus Biden administration, will pay farmers more money not to farm. So at a time period where Americans are going to be experiencing food shortages, the government says that we're going to be paying farmers not to farm. And this happened even during 2020, where there was some supply chain issues and farmers were dumping milk, farmers were killing animals, and they were destroying a lot of the produce where people were basically hungry. There was no way to get, there was food shortages that were going on during 2020. There were more people in America that went hungry in 2020 than had ever before. And the government had directed many of these farmers, because they couldn't bring their stuff to market, right? Because a lot of the food, in essence, is designed for, in terms of its packaging, is designed for distribution to restaurants. Now, restaurants and small businesses make up over 50% of all employees, all the jobs, right, that are created in America are typically created by the small employee, by the small business owner, especially when it comes to like bars and restaurants. Now, most of those will go under because the food prices will start to rise, and they will start to rise at a rate where the small business owners can't afford to pay them. You'll have supply chain disruptions, which will make it difficult. Maybe you'll go to your favorite restaurant and you'll realize that, guys don't have all the same sort of selections that they used to have. You might notice it in the future in the supermarket, especially with what I talked about yesterday about how gas prices are going to rise as oil is going to rise. Don't be shocked if you start to hear of more refineries set ablaze, right? Out of nowhere, they're like, oh, I don't know why these refineries are all catching on fire. And of course, as gas prices rise, it impacts food as well. Food, not only the creation of food, but also the distribution of food. Because there's, like I said yesterday in my other video, that there is a truck driver shortage. So all of this manipulation will cause asset prices to rise. Farm is an asset, just like a home is an asset if you rent it out. Just like a business can be an asset if you can maintain and stay open during these time periods. Now, this went way back into FDR. So if you want to look at a little bit of history, this article is from 2010. It's from November 21st, 2010. And basically a little bit of the article talks about what happened when we paid farmers not to produce. This is first, and this is talking about during the Great Depression. So what they saw during the Great Depression was the Roaring '20s, which later on led to the Great Depression, right? Because of the money printing that went on. And so America will experience a very, very similar thing. A lot of people will think, oh, the market's going to crash, housing market's going to come down. Not yet. A lot of this will not happen yet. What you will see is you will see the markets overinflate. Everything will go hot for probably the next 2 years or so. We might see a little bit of a pullback, but overall, the goal is that the market will trade higher because there's so much liquidity in the market, but everything is primarily designed to feed the rich, right? It's because most people don't own businesses. And so these are typically owned by a lot of the wealthy elites, like the Walmarts, the Costcos. And so as a lot of these small businesses go under, many people now will be directed to places like the Costcos and the Walmarts, etc., right? The Jeff Bezos and Amazon. When everything was shut down, the local markets were deemed non-essential, but places like Walmart, Kroger's, etc., the big businesses were allowed to remain open. So what happened? A lot of that money got funneled, even though you got stimulus checks, a lot of that stimulus check went right back to the wealthy. And so moving forward, prices will go up. And so it goes on to say, it says first Americans had to pay more for bread, corn, and cotton shirts. It says the higher prices for farmers meant price increase for customers buying farm products. The second, because farmers were growing smaller crops, we used up more quickly the food being grown. Soon had to import the very crops we were paying farmers not to produce. In 1935, the U.S. imported 36 million pounds of cotton, 13 million bushels of wheat, and 34 million bushels of corn. In other words, we paid farmers not to produce what we were paying foreigners to send to us overseas. All of this during a Great Depression. 10 million Americans were unemployed and needed cheap food, and the U.S. government was refusing to allow farmers to produce. We are repeating history. Like they say, those who do not pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it. And so this was coming out of Financial Review. This was actually what was going on in Africa. It says flood hit farmers warn of food price rising. This is coming out of Africa. This is as of March 21st, 2021. Now, I had talked about this in another video, talking about, I think it was partially some of it in yesterday's video, where it says the explainer, China, says Russia vulnerable to dollar risks as sanctions from the West multiply. Right, so a lot of people, they sit here and they're like, Russia's the enemy, Russia, Russia, Russia. You heard all that during Trump's presidency. But now you don't hear about it, even though the U.S. is buying more oil now than under Trump's presidency from Russia. And part of the spending bill in the first stimulus went to Russia. There was a large amount of money that went to Russia. And so when all these people get out of line, this is what I said yesterday, when, you know, we will, country America, the government is willing to go to war. They'll send all you patriotic soldiers where they need you to go out to these places under the guise of, you know, sanctions, etc., right? But a lot of it has to do primarily with America trying to keep nations in check. And so it goes on to say, it says Beijing, Moscow, it says, and this article came out on the March 23rd. It says Russian foreign ministers Sergei Lavrov began to visit China this week with a call for Moscow and Beijing to reduce their dependence on the dollar. So a lot of people imagine that China's in charge and China released, you know, the virus, etc. But they are dependent, as the article says, they are dependent upon the dollar. And so a lot of these nations have no way out. They, in essence, are in bed, right, with the government. And it goes on to say, it says they're trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar and the Western payment systems and push back against what he called the West's ideological agenda. And this is not just America. As it goes on to say, it says it comes after years of soaring relations between the United States and China over trade and national security issues and long-standing tensions between Russia and the United States. In the latest development, the United States, European Unions, Britain, and Canada on Monday imposed sanctions on a handful of Chinese officials for alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang. It says opening the door to potential joint penalties, right? And so do you imagine, right, who is in charge? When you look at the relationship, who is in charge? The person who is working for you and sending you goods, or the person who is buying the goods? America doesn't export practically anything to China, except for debt. It's the only thing that they send them. They send them debt, and they, in essence, are almost like a slave class to America. Think about it. most of our food and most of our products come from China. So who's really in charge? If I'm sitting back and all I do is I send you paper with green ink on it, are you in charge or am I in charge? Are you the one who's the slave or am I the slave? Am I the one in charge or is it China? A lot of people think that China is in charge. The reality is that America is the one that's in charge. That's why I said in my last video that in my opinion, in terms of the one who released the virus, I know they want to blame everything on China. Everybody wants to talk about Dr. Fauci. Reality is more than likely was the United States of America, probably trying to keep China in check or for the purpose of manipulating nations. And who came up? Vaccine. America. And when other nations started to create their own vaccines, for example, China, like for example, in places in Europe where AstraZeneca, which vaccines were attacked? Which weren't? Anyways, moving right along. Now, Biden poses, people were like, the wealthy are going to pay, the businesses are going to pay, and Biden proposes 50% corporate tax. I was like, wait a minute, I thought you were going to raise corporate taxes. And I thought the infrastructure spending was going to be much higher than this. And this is as of today. This came out on the 3rd. There was another article when I was watching during trading where they said that Biden was actually considering removing the corporate tax altogether. And so for a lot of people who are like, yeah, they're going to tax the rich, and I'm just like, bro, this is the same old story, same old story. There's numerous articles talking about how there are a lot of people that are just like, they just don't want to go back to work in the offices, etc. And this is going to pose issues for many Americans because if, realistically speaking, if people don't work necessarily in many of these offices and work for these companies that are based here, what is to say that the company will just hire people abroad, right? And so what will happen is basically what looks like the end goal is to, in essence, create shortages, oppress the American people, have the American people, in essence, cry out to the government for help, institute some form of UBI, and then basically further restrict Americans' freedoms. I know people imagine that America is free. We are living on the largest plantation probably that has existed in human history. Many people imagine that they're free. The reality is that you're not. There is so much manipulation going on, and that's why I talk about this scripture in the very beginning. That if you're not paying attention, you're not paying careful attention, and walking as a wise individual, you could find yourself and your family in sore straits. And so while there is a lot of manipulation, there is also a lot of money out there to be made. And if you're not willing to put in the work, you're going to be left behind with this inflation that is coming. And so if you have a skill, best thing you can do is sharpen that skill so that you become more valuable moving forward. So that if companies start to downgrade, they might think twice about letting you go. If you don't have a skill, now is the best time to acquire a skill. Now is the best time to start a business. If you don't have a business, I would recommend that you do. If you have opportunities to pick up a second job so that you can start a business, I recommend doing it. Or if you're doing it, if you plan on doing some sort of investing, whether it's in the stock market, real estate, etc. Many things prices are going to rise. I promise you that. It has nothing to do with inflation. It's primarily as a result of manipulation. It's not because America is in essence circling the drain and people are worried about whether the dollar is going to lose its status. America will go to war and shoot nuclear bombs off before they get rid of their before they let go of the dollar as the world's reserve. So that's not going to happen. Not without a fight. Not without a fight.